Welcome to Loving God, Loving Life. Here we are in Romans chapter 13, where the theme is that Paul counsels the believers to submit to the government and to live righteously. Friends, we're into the practical part. We said in Romans chapter 12, he made this transition into the practical details. But here we see when Paul's giving practical advice, how to live day to day, how the theology affected his moment-by-moment life. You see that no place clearer than in the first couple of verses where Paul says, everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. Well, Paul's view that God was large and in charge, we said back in 9 that God was sovereign. Well, you don't see that any place clearer now than right here, because Paul, it's really black and white to Paul. God is in charge. God is leading the show. So therefore, we submit. If there's somebody in power, God put him there. Now, boy, does our brain struggle with that. We think, well, I'll submit to a president if he's a righteous president and if I voted for him. But I didn't even vote for this person, so Paul would say baloney. Gang, the leader that Paul was under, the Roman Emperor Nero, was just a brutal and awful leader. Just a little bit of his history. I mean, he was just completely ineffectual, neglectful. He was just a brutal leader. And let me read you a little nugget from a historian. He says this: sensitive and handsome, Nero, and then he was from 37 to 68 AD, he ruled. He started out well as an emperor, the historian says, but his early promise gave way to wild extravagance and murder. Yeah, murder. He killed his own mother and his brother in 68 AD after a turbulent 13 years as the emperor. The Senate ran out of patience, declared Nero a public enemy. Nero then fled, and on June 9th, 68 AD, at the age of 30, the young age of 30, he committed suicide. Gang, he was a mess. And Paul, it was all of Paul's ministry was underneath Nero. And Paul says, yeah, God put him there. Gang, that does not compute to our brains. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. But friends, your theology has to impact your life. And there's probably nothing more practical than this, because there's going to be events like that don't make sense in our brains. There are going to be things like that to us are proof, man, if God were really in charge, man, that would never happen. Gang, Nero was the one, both Peter and Paul, Nero was the one who ultimately had their head taken off. And Paul couldn't be clearer. God put him there. God put him there. And therefore, Paul did everything he could to honor him. And the impact, oh man, the peace that has in our lives. And now we can look through the lens of history, and it's really clear today that early church, the zeal that they had was massively greater. The energy they had, the fire that they had. Well, why is that? Well, the oppression that Nero brought was the fire that spread Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. Now, we can see now, looking back through history, that, wow, actually, God used Nero in a way that our brains couldn't have comprehended. I kind of doubt at that time that Paul and the believers were thinking that. But the truth is, God is in charge. And we have to trust him. We have to allow our theology to enter into the practicalities of our everyday life. And when we do, when we trust the sovereignty of God, we trust that God is large and in charge, it has massive effects on our day-to-day life. And one of those effects is just peace and trust. And we're going to trust that God is going to work all things together for our good. We're going to trust that God's going to lead us to somebody today to share his love with. So we pray that. God, today, God, send us one person today to share your love with. My friends, never forget, loving God is the only way to truly love your life.